What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Make It Kustom. Thank you all for being here for this video. Today, we're gonna go over the basics of MIG welding. This is something that everybody needs to know. It's something that could be confusing if you're just starting out. How to set up your machine, how to listen for or look for the different things that could be wrong with your weld. So we're gonna see how your wire speed, your voltage setup, how your technique could affect your weld, and what my favorite techniques are to do MIG welding on steel. Let's get into the video. All right, so what we're gonna learn about in this video is just the basics of MIG welding. I'm using a Lincoln Electric SP175T. I bought it on Craigslist for I think 450 bucks with the cart and the bottle, just as an extra welder in case I run out of gas or whatever, somebody else is working in here. It's a great little machine. I've got 030 wire in it, and I've got 75-25 gas mix, 75% CO2, 25% argon. There are a couple of different gas mixes that you can use, but that's a really common one, and it's the only mix gas I use in my MIG welders. This machine, it's pretty basic. It's got voltage and wire speed. You've got A, B, C, D, or E for voltage, and we've got just variable wire speed. These numbers don't really matter. Every machine is a little bit different. My Miller has a digital readout as to feet per second or feet per minute on wire speed, and it also has a digital readout for voltage. So I want you to be able to understand how to set up a MIG welder without looking for 17 volts and 200 feet per minute wire speed. That shouldn't matter. I want you to be able to listen to it, be able to look at it, be able to hear it, make a good weld. That's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna focus on setting up the machine, a little bit of technique, what technique I use. Everybody's got a little bit of a different signature as to how they whip their welds around when they're MIG welding. You're either making C's, you're whipping and pausing, that sort of thing. I'll show you the way I like to do it. This material is just 10 gauge steel. This is very common. This is kind of what most frames are made of if you're building a hot rod or whatever. I use this stuff a lot for brackets, but the same thing goes on all thicknesses of metal, on how to hear it and how to see it to know that you're making a good weld. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the machine wrong and let you guys listen to it and look at it and see what's wrong with it, and then we'll get into setting it right. Okay, so what I'm gonna do first is let you listen to what it's like if you don't have enough wire speed. Basically, it's something that a welding teacher told me one time, and it really sticks in my head, is you wanna hear like the perfect temperature of bacon frying. Like you got a mint pan, you got a fresh thing of bacon, and you drop it in there and it's like, that's what you're looking for with MIG welding, a less scientific way of trying to figure out your correct settings. So I'm gonna have not enough wire speed. Basically, you're gonna hear a little bit of like a slower sizzle, and that indicates that you don't have enough wire speed. I'm gonna put it on C right in the middle, have not enough wire speed. It might burn back on our tip a little bit. That's another sign. If your wire ever burns back and damages the tip, then you don't have enough wire speed, or your drive rollers inside your machine may not be tight enough to be pushing out your wire. Okay, well actually I'm gonna tack it properly first. This is gonna be not enough wire speed. So you hear that sizzle, sizzle, pop, sizzle, 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 pop. That's because the wire is going and touching the puddle, and then it's burning back because it's not feeding at a fast enough rate. What you want to hear in slow motion basically is the wire is coming down, it touches your puddle, it burns back, touches your puddle, burns back, touches your puddle, burns back, and it just keeps going like zap, 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 zap. That's what makes that bacon frying sound. So you can see this weld. I mean, it doesn't look terrible, but it is definitely not enough wire speed. So I'm gonna turn the wire up a little here and let you listen to that. This still may not be the perfect setting, but you'll be able to hear the difference. See, it's a much better sounding weld. I would say this weld is a little bit on the cold side. And what I mean by that is that the weld itself has not wet out on the edges. It has not flowed out a little bit flatter than what this is. It's a little bit too convex. So you want your weld to be able to flatten out or wet out and be nice and consistent. This one is a little bit on the cold side. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to hit another notch on here. This is my voltage. And then proportionately, you need a little bit more wire speed if you increase your voltage. So let's give this another try. Okay, so this one here is a much hotter weld. You can tell that it's a little bit flatter looking. I can tell it's a lot hotter. You can see that the heat has gone a little bit wider there. I think it's pretty decent, but we could probably still get it a little bit better. What I'd like to do is I'd like to do a little bit longer weld and just fine tune it, and I want you to really listen as to what it sounds like when you've got proper settings. It's already sounding pretty good, but I'm gonna do a little bit longer weld here, and we'll really be able to see what it's like. Okay, so it is pretty decently set up. I don't think there's a ton of improvement that we can make with the settings on this machine, but I want you to hear now what it sounds like if you have too much wire speed. Okay, so we're gonna jack this up, and it's gonna kind of sound like a bit of a machine gun. Basically, what's gonna happen is that the wire is gonna be feeding faster than it can burn at the voltage that it's set at. So right now, you're gonna hear what it's like to have too much wire speed. Okay, so this right here just has way too much metal now, and you can hear that it was just trying to shove way too much metal in for how hot the voltage was, so it couldn't burn it as fast as it was depositing it. I mean, even more extreme, you'll hear it now. I'll show you what happens with just way too much wire speed. You know, there's so much spatter everywhere. I really wanted it to start to bird nest a little bit to show you guys, because I've seen some bad welds. Okay, one sec, I'm gonna try this again. Make it really horrible. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So you've seen that weld before. I've seen that weld before on many occasions on a couple of cars that have come in here before that have been previously repaired. That's just way, way, way too much wire speed and maybe not enough voltage as well. It just cannot handle it. When you see terrible welds like that, it's a setting issue. Like that person, maybe their technique is okay, maybe the way that they're whipping the torch around is okay, but they just have the wrong settings. So don't get discouraged by seeing horrible welds and think you're the worst welder. It's your settings. Settings are very important. Let's get to another coupon here. We're gonna try this again. Now, I'm gonna show you what the different positions are. So this technically is a horizontal position weld. If we were welding like this, that would be a flat position. If we were welding like this, that would be vertical. Vertical up and down are acceptable. They're both kind of for different things. And then overhead welding is when you're welding like this. With your settings correct, overhead welding isn't as scary as it sounds, really. I mean, you might get a little bit of sparks in your hair or whatever, but it welds much the same as horizontal welding. So basically, when you're welding with MIG, let's go over a little bit of the technique here. I am holding this gun pointed in the direction of travel. That's something that, I guess it's up for debate, but the way I was taught is that you always push the puddle. You're always pushing it in the direction you're traveling. The way I like to weld is that I start my puddle and I'll burn forward. It's called the whip and pause technique. I burn forward and I come back to fill a little bit. I burn forward and I come back to fill a little bit. And what that almost does is it almost preheats the area that you're about to fill. You whip it forward and then you come back and fill it up. And now when I'm looking at my weld, I'm able to almost see that when I burn forward, I can come back and my weld will become the same size as the previous weld deposit. So I can keep things pretty consistent. You'll get the hang of it, you'll get a little bit more of a signature going. Some guys like to do like little C's, some guys like to go up and down, some guys like to make little circles. I personally like to kind of whip and pause for my technique to get my beads to look decent. So that's something that you can play with. Everybody's different. Machine settings are the most important. Some guys just like to make their welds, you know, totally smooth and not even move. And you can do that too, and I don't think it's a bad weld. You just have to set your machine accordingly. Let's try a couple of different techniques now and just have you look at them. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna show you kind of the different signatures that I just talked about. Oh, better change my machine settings to something that isn't gonna be bird poop. If you've got this same machine on 10 gauge, this is the machine setting I like, D and 5. Okay, so right here, I'm gonna try the totally straight technique. I'm not gonna move around at all. I'm gonna just push the puddle. Basically, I'll be at the end of the puddle and just pushing it along totally straight at a 45-degree angle. So there you have it, totally straight, no moving around. Weld's okay, could be a little bit hotter maybe. Now I'm gonna try little circles. Little circles does actually look pretty damn nice, actually. Maybe I should change my technique. And here's the whip and pause technique. Okay, so now I just want to show you guys a couple of different ways to weld. So one of the things that if you ask a welder who's a structural steel welder, they will laugh at you for welding vertical down. And vertical down is something that I guess it's controversial, I don't know. I use it. I have a bit of a technique of my own to weld vertical down that I know works wicked. The problem is that when you're welding down, it's really easy for your weld to pull up and not sink into the metal. It doesn't burn in, so it's not strong. And it could look like it's kind of strong, but it just isn't because it's not really getting into the metal, and it is gonna sound weird, but I push my welds down. I stay ahead of the puddle and I'll push my weld down, staying ahead of the puddle. So I'm not actually, I guess, pushing it down. The puddle stays up. I can keep the heat in the material by going downhand, but pushing down. If you try and weld downhand like this, it'll just drip and be disgusting, and it'll be a crappy weld. So I'm just gonna show you my technique for that. If you feel the need to comment and tell me that I'm wrong, go for it. Okay, first off, I'm just gonna show you me trying to make a weld, doing it the way that I believe is wrong. I'm gonna be holding this welder up like this. It's kind of natural for you to want to keep your welder pointed up and drag it because, you know, you're fighting gravity. But let's first try that. The weld looks okay, and I'm sure it did burn in some. I do believe that it's a bit dicey to weld that way. So I'm gonna show you my technique now, where I'm actually pushing the weld down. You can tell I got tons of heat in there. The legs of the weld wet right into the side. It got lots of penetration. I did do a little bit of whip and pause technique on that, but that's welding vertical down. Okay, now let's do an outside corner weld. Because we're welding on the outside corner edge, it will be a bit of a different heat setting as to welding on the inside of a corner. That reason being because you're right on the edge of the metal and it accepts the heat a lot quicker. I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. and just guess at it and see how we do. It's almost never that you get a weld that's perfectly flat like that, so I'm gonna do it this way so that you can see in more of a real world scenario. You can see that one worked out quite well. I did turn down my machine for that, like I said, because the heat does get absorbed by the metal much quicker when you're on the edge of a piece of metal. So you can see that it burned the edge of this metal away and really sunk in with the penetration. So this is the whip and pause technique where I burn forward and I come back to fill. I burn forward and I come back to fill. I move about 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch each time that I burn forward and come back to fill. I'm at a 45-degree angle this way and approximately a 35-degree angle this way. Okay, so now this was our whip and pause technique. I'll do my next weld with a little bit of the circle technique, and then we'll finish off with the C. So doing little circles, it works quite well still. You're definitely moving the heat around a lot. When I'm doing these little circles, I find it's a little bit more difficult to be consistent, but that's just me, and I don't do that technique, so I find it a little bit more difficult. So, like I said, whip and pause technique is my favorite technique. Let's do another one here. We'll try doing little C's, and then we'll finish off doing one just totally straight. And then I'll try going definitely as straight as I can. You know, that can look nice as well. Okay, so one thing I definitely want to go over when you're welding, because it's really difficult for you to see through a camera. I wish that I had a really dark lens so that we could film this with the video looking like through my eyes, what I can see. This is what I would like to explain to you, is that here's our weld, and this is our puddle here. This is our whip, our whip, our whip. This is our puddle. What I mean by pushing the weld, you would think that you would want your wire speed behind it to push it. That's incorrect. I'm depositing my wire right here. That's where you want to be. You want to be ahead of the weld, pushing it along, but staying at the front of the puddle. So I might burn ahead a little bit, so I'll move this way, and then I'll come back to fill, but I'm staying ahead of the puddle, or in the puddle, but at the front of it, and you'll see that your weld will just build up behind as you move along, but you do want to stay at the front of the puddle, always. And this will keep you moving along and keep you putting heat into the material as you go. I'm trying to think of what else I can tell you guys for this quick little demo. Oh, let's quickly talk about the machine itself. When I was talking before about your wire speed not being enough and you have the wire burn back a little bit, that may or may not be because of the wire speed adjustment on the machine. Something else that you can look for if you don't feel like it's changing when you adjust your wire speed is the tension of your drive rolls. So if you open up the inside of your welder, this one has to pop up a little bit to be open. There'll be a spring and a nut almost on every single welder. When you load your spool and your wire goes in here, these are the drive rollers that I'm talking about. So I'm just going to turn the machine on so you can see them work. These rollers are powered. That's what's pushing. So if this is too loose, then those rollers might slip. And that could give you the same symptom as not enough wire speed because it's not consistently pushing your wire out. So what you would need to do there is just to tighten that up a little bit. What else I can tell you about the inside of the machine is tip that off and you can pull your roller out. There are different size grooves for different thicknesses of wire. This is 030 wire, but you can use 023, you can use 035, you can use 045, which will be in a much larger machine, but those rollers must have the right groove for the size wire you're running. I couldn't just change this to 035 wire without changing my rollers. I couldn't just change this to 023 wire without changing my rollers. But for the most part, if you are a beginner and you're welding on your hot rod, if you've got a little bit of sheet metal work to do and a little bit of structural stuff, my personal suggestion is the 030 wire. I've welded sheet metal with it as well as welded chassis with it. My other suggestion is that if you are gonna do any welding on your chassis, you really need a 220 welder. I know people can do it and it can be done with a 110 volt welder. My personal feeling is that it's a little bit too small and a little bit too dicey for a beginner to get a strong weld out of a small welder like that. So make sure that you are welding as hot as you can with the welder that you've got for the material you're using. Hopefully I've covered the basics for you on a little bit of MIG welding and the setup, how to use it, how to get it to work right, what to do if it's set up wrong. Thanks everybody for watching Make It Custom. I also just want to thank everybody that have supported us through our Metal Reborn premiere and apologize for our technical difficulties in the first little bit of the Metal Reborn online premiere. That was something we've never done before. I kind of regret doing it at the exact same time as the regular premiere since we weren't on the ball enough to be able to get it fixed immediately. But hopefully you guys all enjoyed the movie and it's up there for 7 days. So if you did get the premiere, go ahead and watch it as many times as you want for the next 7 days. And if you were really bummed out about the technical difficulties at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, hit us up for a refund and we'll refund it. Thanks everybody for watching Make It Custom. We appreciate your support, your comments, your likes, everything. So don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.